Up in our study as we march through the New Testament. And Luke chapter 14 is basically a chapter that helps us to appreciate and to understand what it truly means to be Jesus' disciple. A disciple meaning a learner of Christ, a follower of Christ. And, if we get through the book of Luke and we haven't had it nailed yet what it means to be a disciple of Christ, we've really done something wrong, because this is just, it's like sitting by the shore at the ocean. When you're sitting at the ocean, the waves are coming and they're crashing against the shore over and over again. That's kind of what the Gospel of Luke is doing for us. It's just constantly and consistently teaching us, this is what it means to be a disciple of Christ. This is what it means to be a disciple of Christ. And sometimes it's a bit repetitive. Some of the themes that we're coming across, we've come across before. But we got to understand that Jesus had to teach these things over and over again, because what takes longer to do than just teaching somebody something so that they can learn it is unlearning things. Helping a person to unlearn things that they perhaps have been taught their whole life. And these disciples had grown up seeing religion done a particular way, seeing people relate to God in a certain way. And now Jesus is coming with a drastic new way of approaching God. Actually, it's a way that God had desired all along, but that had gotten kind of muggled over, had been kind of buried underneath a bunch of man-made rules and traditions and laws. And therefore, the heart of what it means to follow God needed to be unearthed again. And so he's unteaching them things that they had learned all their lives, so that he can then impart to them the new wine, impart to them the new teachings that they can receive and take and distribute to the rest of the world. And so it should be no surprise that Luke is spending so much time, and that Jesus had spent so much time helping and preparing his disciples to know what it really means to approach God. What does it mean to be religious and that sort of thing. And so we'll go into chapter 14 and we'll see some things we've seen before, but presented in a unique way, or in a different way that we've seen before. Chapter 14, if you want to put down a theme at the beginning of the chapter, you could say it deals with feasting and food. Here Jesus is going to use analogies in connection to eating. In the context here, he's sitting down with the Pharisee who had invited him in to eat bread. And he uses it as an opportunity to teach some things about discipleship, to teach some things about the right and correct approach to God. And so we're going to see several lessons come from food. And I really like that the kingdom life in connection to Christ, can be presented as a feast. As we're going through Luke, we're coming across some very challenging teachings by Christ, right? It seems like every Sunday we're getting hard teachings by Jesus. This is what it means to be a disciple. Total commitment, denial of self, staying centered on the kingdom, seeking the kingdom first above everything else. And even if that means selling your property or doing whatever you have to do to be committed, do it. And sometimes we might think, boy, being a Christian doesn't sound like very much fun. It doesn't seem like really something that a person would want to embark on, at least on the surface. But Jesus here is relating to it similar to a feast. Yeah, sure, if you're just looking at the outward things, you look at a Christian, you think, oh, they don't do this, they don't do that, they can't participate in these particular activities. And you might think, yeah, what a dismal, gray, dark way of living, just, always having to deny yourself. But those who have truly followed true discipleship, the things you are required to deny yourself of pale in comparison to the love, the satisfaction, the fulfillment that you get from a relationship with Christ. And the best way to describe that is a feast. Just having your every need, your every inward need fully supplied. To where, maybe outwardly it might seem like you're living a difficult, hard life, but on the inside you're fully satisfied because you're living according to your true purpose. And when you're satisfying your true purpose, your most inner being becomes satisfied. And it's like feasting. It's like sitting down at a table. Even Jesus talked about this in Revelation chapter 3 to the church at Laodicea, how he had become kind of lackadaisical in their spirituality. He said, look, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone would open the door to me, I will come in and dine with him, and he with me. And so he relates a relationship with someone, a person opening up their hearts as though he will come in and just dine with you. It'll be like a feast. It'll be enjoyment that would be in connection to that. So the Christian life is a life of enjoyment. It's a life of satisfaction, the deepest needs of our hearts being satisfied through Christ. And so when you think about the things we got to give up, maybe sometimes denying ourselves, sometimes committing ourselves, sometimes being persecuted or something like that, those things just pale in comparison to what we receive from Christ on a day-to-day basis. So we'll get into chapter 14, and again, these different teachings are going to be connected to feasting, at least in the first half of chapter 14. So in verse 1, we do get the kind of the context of what's going on. It says, it happened that when he went into the house of one of the leaders of the Pharisees on the Sabbath to eat bread, they were watching him closely. Now that word in the original language doesn't mean they're watching him closely like out of admiration, or they're looking at him like, oh, I want to be just like him. No, they're looking at him closely with scrutiny. Like they're looking for Jesus to mess up. They're watching him closely to see something that they can do, that they can catch him in, to kind of cast accusation against him. It says in verse 2, and there in front of him was a man suffering from dropsy. So, could it be that this man with dropsy was planted there by the Pharisees to see what Jesus would do? I wouldn't put it past him. It doesn't say in the text, so we can't be certain about it. But it very well could be that this Pharisee invites Jesus in on the Sabbath, a day of rest, to eat with him. And then, oh yeah, by the way, there's a man with dropsy. And they're watching Jesus very closely with scrutiny to see what he can cast against him. 7 times in Jesus' ministry, at least recorded times in Jesus' ministry, he heals someone on the Sabbath. We've already seen it 3 times previously here in the Gospel of Luke. We saw him heal the man with the withered hand. We saw him heal the woman who was bent over. We've seen him heal people time and time again throughout the Gospel of Luke. And so it's already been kind of established that Jesus has no problems at all with healing people on the Sabbath. But once again, Luke wants to bring us back to this idea, because what it does is it opens up for us an understanding of religion and what Jesus is truly looking for. We're just trying to observe some day, and as a result becoming harsh and cold towards people? Or are we utilizing it to actually propagate compassion and love for people, which was the original intent? He says, and Jesus answered and spoke to the lawyers and Pharisees, saying, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? But they kept silent. This was something he's gone over time and time again. Maybe not with these particular Pharisees, but in general in his teachings. And they couldn't answer him. Is it lawful? And it's not so much that they didn't have an answer. They had their rules. They had their traditions that they said, yeah, you can maybe heal if someone's about to die, but if it's not anything that's life-threatening, then you are to wait until the next day. Wait until it's not the Sabbath, and then do your healings. So they already had an answer, but they're keeping silent. Maybe because they already know where Jesus is coming from, or maybe they're just waiting to see what Jesus is going to say so that they can catch him in it. But nonetheless, they keep silent. And he took hold of him and healed him and sent him away. Healed on the Sabbath. And he said to them, which one of you will have a son or an ox fall into a well and will not immediately pull him out on a Sabbath day? And they could make no reply to this. Not because they didn't know, it's because they didn't want to say, because it would confirm that, yes, it was okay to heal on the Sabbath. Back then they didn't have plumbing like we have today, where just turn on the water and the water comes. They had wells, and so it was very dangerous sometimes. Maybe it was an old well that got covered up, and You could step in it easily and fall into it. It could happen to one of your animals. It could happen to your son, as he mentions here, or one of your loved ones. And sure, you're not going to say, you have your son fall into a well, you're not going to say, well, are you about to die? No, Dad, I'm not about to die. All right, well, I'll come back tomorrow when it's not the Sabbath, and I'll pull you out. You just stay right there, son. Of course you're not going to do that. If your son falls into a well, you're going to pull him up. And Jesus is saying, why wouldn't I do the same for people who have fallen into the well of sickness and having these hardships laid on them? I'm not going to wait till the next day. They're here. They have an opportunity to be healed. I'm here as their healer, and I'm going to heal them right away. I'm not going to cause them to have to wait. And so Jesus here is teaching us that our religion should never diminish compassion. It's very easy for religion to become cold and distant, to just boil it down to a bunch of rules, a bunch of observances, a bunch of rites that we follow, and all the while kind of distance ourselves more and more from the world. And even put those rules and those checklists above showing love and compassion and care for people. All the while we're fighting and bickering over certain things, there's a world out there that's hurting, that's suffering, that needs the compassion of Christ. And religion truly is, at least a Christian religion, truly is a religion of compassion. We are who we are so that we can go into a hurting world, into a suffering world, and demonstrate compassion and love and care. And show that the God that loves us, we now demonstrate the love that He's shown to us in the way that we care for others and being compassionate for them. You know, the word religion doesn't really show up that much in the New Testament. Hardly at all. And the one time that it is in connection to being compassionate. In James chapter 1 and verse 26, he says, if anyone thinks himself to be religious. Now, religious just means the outward expression of one's faith, okay? I know it kind of has a bad meaning for us this day and age because religion has been abused and misused, but that's all it is. It's just the outward expression of someone's faith. Anyone who has faith and they live that faith out in their life, they're a religious person. That's what it is, and that's going back to the original word here for religious. But anyways, he says, if anyone thinks himself to be religious and yet does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his own heart, this man's religion is worthless. So if you can't control your tongue, you're deceiving yourself. You're not really religious. You're abusing people with your tongue. But he goes on to describe what true religion is in verse 27. Pure and undefiled religion in the sight of our God and Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world. Do good and be good. You could summarize it. Do good. Go out and show acts of kindness and love towards people. Visit the sick. Help out the orphans and the widows. Have a life of love and care for other people. That's true religion. Getting out there and getting your hands dirty. Going out there and interacting with a world that's hurting out there. That's a big part of what it means to be religious in a Christian context. And so here in this first section of chapter 14, Jesus is teaching us that very thing. Don't let your religion cause you to be hard-hearted, to become cold and distant from the world. The world doesn't need any more of that type of individuals. It needs a world of people of warmth and care and love and compassion. Then he goes on to give us another teaching from eating, from feast. In verse 7 he says, and he began speaking a parable to the invited guests when he noticed how they had been picking out the places of honor at the table. So they're coming to eat, and it was pretty commonplace back then. If you wanted, you got there early to get a good seat. And by good seat, it doesn't mean a place where you can see real good like you might do at a football game or something, but like wanting to come in and actually get a place of honor. Back then, if you sat around the table, each place was distinguished, or each place was like a position. Your position before the person who invited you. So if you were at their right hand, boy, that was the place of honor. But as you go down the line, you get further away. That's a lesser place of honor as you go down. And so these people would rush into a dinner to hurry up and get into the good seat, to get in the place of high position. was the idea. And so Jesus uses this as an opportunity to teach them a lesson about humility. He says, saying to them, verse 8, when you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for someone more distinguished than you may have been invited by him. And he who invited you both will come and say to you, give your place to this man. And then in disgrace you will proceed to occupy the least place. But when you are invited, go and recline at the last place, so that when the one who has invited you comes, he will say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will have honor in the sight of all who are at the table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. And so Jesus is saying, when you go into a feast to eat, don't go plopping down right there at the top of the chain, at the top of the high position there. Because if you do that and you don't really deserve that spot, it's going to be pretty awkward. It's going to be pretty humiliating when he says, excuse me, you don't deserve to be sitting at my right hand. You go sit down there at the end of the table. That's going to be very demoralizing for you. However, if you come in and you sit at the last place and you sit down and you say, you know what, I don't deserve to sit next to the host. I'm just going to sit over here. I'm going to mind my own business. But then, after everyone sits down, the host stands up and says, hey, Joey, or whoever it is, come on up. Sit at my right hand. You deserve to sit up higher. Boy, that's going to look good then, because everyone's going to see that you are moving from a lower position to a higher position. And so that has practical application. I mean, think about all the people that we revere throughout human history. Typically, it's the humble people. It's the people who, they were gifted, they were talented, they accomplished a lot of things, but they did it with a humble and meek attitude. However, those who maybe even accomplished a lot, but they were boastful and full of pride, and they would very much let you know, if you didn't know how great they were, just ask them and they'd tell you how great they were. Those are the people that, we might appreciate their accomplishments, but at the same time, we're kind of repelled by that. And that's something inherent within us, and I think that reflects the heart of the Father. Because this not only just has practical application in how you order yourself when you sit down, but it has a lot to do also with our relationship with God himself, because this is the attitude of God as well. In James chapter 4, we're told that God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. That he exalts the humble, but he turns away the proud. And that's definitely true. In Proverbs chapter 6, we're told that at the top of the list of the sins that God abhors is the haughty eyes. In other words, people who are prideful, people who have their nose in the air. Those are the people, that's the sin that's at the top of the list of the sins that God absolutely abhors. And so God is very much resistant against prideful people. And we ourselves are resistant against prideful people. You come into contact with someone who's always talking about themselves, always talking about how great they are, talking about this, that, and the other. We typically don't like to be around people like that, right? We like to be around people who are humble, who are that sort of thing. And when it comes to the grand scheme of things, that's what the Lord is looking for, people who are humble. When we just humbly come before him, and we say, Lord, I'm not even worthy to even lift my eyes to you, Lord. Be merciful to me, a sinner. Then the Lord says, you know what, that's the type of person I want to exalt. Because if he exalts the pride, those who are proud, what's going to happen? They're just going to become all the more proud. And they're going to turn into a monster. But those who are humble, who see their insufficiency, God can exalt them without turning them into a monster. He can exalt them, and they become a benefit to the kingdom and to all the people around them. Christ himself, the creator of everything. John chapter 1 says that there's nothing that was created that was not created through Jesus. And if anyone is high and exalted, he was, in the glory of the Father. And what did he do? He humbled himself. And remember, the book of Philippians talks about this. He humbled himself and came in the appearance of a man and humbled himself to the point of death, even death on a cross. So he humbled himself, showed us the path of humility. He said, the Son of Man didn't come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom. If he could humble himself, that's what he asked us to do. But the promise is that if we do humble ourselves before him, in due time we will be exalted. We will be lifted up. But we do it merely because we see our position before God and we honor God to such an extent that it humbles ourselves, and therefore we can have the appropriate relationship with him that way. So religion oftentimes can cause us to be cold and distant, but it can also cause us to be very prideful. And that's what he's teaching us against right here. I have it all together. I do this. I do that. I've accomplished this for the church, or I've done this for God. Being puffed up. That's not the approach that we are to have before God. The opposite is actually true. All right, and then he continues on in verse 12 with another teaching in connection to food and feasting. He says, and he also went on to say to the one who had invited him, when you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your rich neighbors. Otherwise, they may also invite you in return, and that will be your repayment. But when you give a reception, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed, since they do not have the means to repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. So he's talking to this guy who's the host, right? And he says, when you give a luncheon or a dinner, don't invite your friends, don't invite the wealthy, the influential, the popular, the powerful, because then once you help them out, then it's just like, well, I helped you out, so now I can get something in return from you. It's a selfish way of being generous. There's a loving way of being generous, and there's a selfish way of being generous. And here he's teaching a principle. Now, let's be very clear that Jesus isn't teaching that you should never invite your friends or your family for dinner. Don't go canceling your Thanksgiving plans for this year. That's not what he's teaching. Jesus himself invited his friends. Remember, the very last supper that he had was with his disciples, with his closest friends. He's clearly not teaching that. He's teaching a principle of what it truly means to be generous. True generosity is done purely out of love, purely out of care for other people, and not seeking something in return. And what this teaches us is that you can do loving acts and not be loving at all. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, that chapter on love, the Apostle Paul said, even if I give all my possessions to the poor and do not have love, it profits me nothing. Wait, how can you give all your possessions to the poor and not do it out of love? Well, that shows that you can do something that is an action of love that on the outside appears to be love, but all the while doing it with the wrong heart, not doing it with love. So merely doing the action is not enough and will fall short. It's doing it truly and sincerely and absolutely out of a heart of love and care and compassion and concern for another individual. Not seeking anything out of return from them. Not doing it saying, well, if I scratch this person's back, they'll scratch my back. It's truly out of love and care for people. God shows us so much love and so much care. He sent his son. JT talked about this last week, He sent his own son to die on the cross for our sins. Is it because we can do anything to him that will repay him? Absolutely not. It was purely out of love. There's nothing God is the God of 1,000 hills, or owns the cattle of 1,000 hills, we're told. Micah talks about that. And there's nothing that we can give God that he doesn't already own. He doesn't love us so that he can get something out of it, out of return. He loves us purely out of love. And that's the type of love we should have for people. Not selfishly motivated, but just compassionately driven. And then it says in verse 15, when one of those who were reclining at the table with him heard this, he said to him, blessed is everyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God. So this person is very astute, very in tune to what Jesus is saying. Jesus is talking about food. He's talking about feasting. We're at this Pharisee's house to eat bread. And being the spiritual person that they were, the faithful or the person filled with faith that they were, they tie this all to the ultimate feast. When the Lord comes again, when the Messiah comes again, The Jewish mindset back then was that there was going to be this big feast. And in one place I read, they actually believed that Leviathan would be one of the things that they would eat. Leviathan was that big sea monster talked about in the book of Job, but also is kind of symbolic of Satan. But nonetheless, they had a whole belief system based on this big feast that they would have when the kingdom came. And this person is probably thinking about this at this time. Oh, Jesus is talking about food. He must be talking about the kingdom coming. How blessed is everyone who eats bread in the kingdom of God. But Jesus is going to correct some things. He's going to say, you know what? It may not be the people who you think are going to be there that are going to be there when they're eating and feasting in the kingdom of God. And he uses a parable to demonstrate this. In verse 16, but he said to him, a man was giving a big dinner, and he invited many. And at the dinner hour, he sent his slave to say to those who had been invited, come, for everything is ready now. So they had already got the invitations. If you've ever been to a wedding or you've been to some other big event, you get the invitation, RSVP. You've given the invitation. You're set up to attend this event, whatever it is. But when it came around to actually coming to it, this is what happened in verse 18. But they all alike began to make excuses. The first one said to him, I have bought a piece of land, and I need to go out and look at it. Please consider me excused. Another one said, I have bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I am going to try them out. Please consider me excused. Another one said, I have married a wife, and for that reason I cannot come. So they're all making excuses. They've been invited. It's already been set up. You know, anyone who's set up some type of function, some type of event, you know that it's very important to know how many people are coming. That's why you RSVP, so that you can plan ahead. You have all the spaces already marked out where everyone's going to sit. So very much an inconvenience and an insult sometimes when people would RSVP, but then, you know, I got other things to do. It would have been an insult to the host here. And the slave came back, verse 21, and reported this to the master. Then the head of the household became angry and said to his slave, go out at once into the streets and lanes of the city and bring in here the poor and crippled and blind and lame. And the slave said, Master, what you have commanded, or what you commanded, has been done, and still there is room. And the master said to the slave, go out into the highways and along the hedges and compel them to come in, so that my house may be filled. For I tell you, none of these or those men who were invited shall taste of my dinner. So greatly insulted by this action by these people, using these kind of arbitrary things to kind of skirt around showing up to this great feast that required a whole lot of foresight and planning and money and all this stuff, and the people didn't even appreciate it enough to show up. And so he's saying, well, go out to the crippled, the lame, to the poor. You know what? If the people who have 5 new yokes of oxen, who have just gotten married, who has just purchased some land, they don't see the need for the feast. They've already got their lives kind of squared away. Go out into the people who are desperate, to the people who are hungry, to the people who need to sit at the feast, the people who desire a place to sit down and be accepted and be filled. Go out and reach out to those people. And they did that, and those people did come in. That still wasn't full, so he said, go out even in the distant areas and go out and bring in more people. I want my house to be filled. People who are invited, who were too good to show up, I don't want them in it. I'm going to invite these other people who you wouldn't expect to come into the feast to enjoy my dinner. Now there's 2 different layers of teaching or application that could be drawn from this. The first and foremost, and I think what Jesus was primarily hitting at, was the idea of the Jews and the Gentiles. You know, this is probably a Jewish person. They're sitting there with the Pharisee. They're just expecting that, when the Messiah comes, when the kingdom of heaven is ushered in, surely us Jews are going to be invited or are going to make it into the feast because we're Jews. We're descendants of Abraham. We're the invited guests. We're God's chosen people. We've gotten the invitation. We RSVP. We want to be there. But they weren't living the life of wanting to be there. Now that Christ had come, and here the kingdom of heaven is being ushered in, and John the Baptist came preaching, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Jesus has come proclaiming the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And what is happening as he's going through Judea, through Galilee, a lot of the people, especially the highfalutin religious people, are saying, no, we don't want that. And they're rejecting it. Now that the actual time to come in and enjoy the fruits of the kingdom has come, they're now rejecting it. So what Jesus is hinting at here is that, well, you highfalutin religious people don't want it, so now I'm going to the poor, to the sick, to the lame. I'm going to the prostitutes. I'm going to the tax collectors. I'm going to the people that you consider sinners, because they see their need. They see that they need something beyond this life. They need forgiveness. They need mercy, the mercy of God. And so now I'm coming to them so that my Father's house can be filled, because you guys thought you were too good for it, or you had other things going on, and you weren't in need. And so he would go through Galilee and Judea, and those were the type of people that were following Jesus. These what would you call marginalized people were coming in. But even after Jesus ascends into heaven, what's going to happen after that? Now he's going to even extend beyond the borders of Israel, beyond the borders of just the Jewish people, and extend the invitation to all people. Why? Because the Father wants his house full. He wants everyone to come in. And those who reject it, who aren't concerned with it, who have other things going on, okay, fine. The dinner's not for them, but it's for those who desperately see their need for what I can provide for them and come to it and want to partake of it. So that's probably the primary thing that Jesus is teaching. But secondarily, we can see a principle here that we should follow, and that we should take this to heart to say that Jesus is inviting us to the feast. Matter of fact, I would say probably each and every day Jesus is inviting us to a feast. Going back to what we quoted earlier from Revelation chapter 3. He's standing at the door to knock, and if anyone will open the door to him, he'll come and dine with them. But how often do we say to the Lord, you know what? I've got my to-do list. I've got school. I've got work. I've got family. I've got all these other things. Lord, first let me take care of these things, Lord, and then I'll pursue my relationship with you. First, let me get my degree, or first let me achieve this level of success in the company, or whatever the case may be. And then once I get all that together, Lord, then I'll focus on my relationship with you. And if we're doing that in our hearts and in our minds, then we're following after these guests that have been invited and said, no, I have yoke of oxen to take care of. I have land to see. I've got a wife that I just married. Jesus is teaching us here that if you want to come and feast, if you want to receive the blessings, the joy, the fulfillment that he can provide, it takes walking away sometimes from these other things that distract us and focusing more on him. Not that those things are wrong. It's not wrong to own oxen. It's not wrong to have land. It's not wrong to marry a wife, obviously. But it's all about priorities. What are we putting first? Our relationship with Christ, or are these other earthly concerns? He's inviting us to dine with him each and every day. And each and every day we should say, the first thing, the priority of my day today is to seek Christ. To love him, to live a life before him in obedience to him. That's my first priority. And then everything will trickle from that. Everything will fall in line in that. But first off, I want to dine with Christ. I want to feast with Christ. And then we get to the last section. And again, we're going to get some hard sayings from Christ about discipleship. So buckle your safety belts, and let's continue on through the chapter. In verse 25, it says, "Now large crowds were going along with him, and he turned and said to them, 'If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple.'" Jesus understood that relationships are some of the biggest barriers to following him. And the closer the relationship, the more precious the relationship, the more of a hindrance that relationship can be. And that's why he's using the most intimate, close relationships as examples of this. Now, what does he mean when he says hate his own father and mother? I thought Jesus was all about love. Wasn't Jesus all about, the two greatest commandments, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself? Well, this word for hate is a little bit different than how we use hate in the English. it basically just means to love less. Okay, to put them on a lower in a lower place than Christ. Unless you put Christ above even your father, your mother, your children, and anyone else, your brothers and sisters, then you can't be my disciple. In other words, you got to have priority when it comes to relationships. You can't serve two masters. You can't put these relationships first to the neglect of me. You have to put me first, if perhaps sometimes to the neglect of those. Jesus knew what he was teaching, the following that he would have, was going to cause controversy. Jesus has always been controversial. And anytime Jesus is brought into the equation, especially when he's freshly implanted into this society, there's going to be friction. There's going to be people who are against Jesus. There's those who are for Jesus. And a lot of times those same people will be within the same family. And there's going to be some very difficult decisions that these disciples were going to have to make. When it comes down to it, when the decision has to be made, and my father and my mother say, you follow Jesus, then you cannot be my son or my daughter anymore. There would be times in which people would experience that, and a decision would have to be made. Do I love Jesus more, or do I love my parents more? Do I love Jesus more, or my brothers and sisters more? And you say, wow, that's harsh. That's difficult. Why would Jesus ask us to do that? You know, Jesus did the same thing. Remember when his mother and his brothers were coming? He was teaching in the house, and they came, and some people from the crowd said, hey, Jesus, your mother and your brothers are coming. They want to speak with you. And there in Matthew chapter 3, you get the indication that the reason they want to speak to him is to say, hey, Jesus, what are you doing? Kind of maybe to even try to divert him a little bit from his main purpose. But all that aside, what Jesus answered said, you know what, who my brother and my sisters are? Those who want to obey the will of my Father. And so he put his own disciples above his brothers and sisters. He put those who love God above even his brothers and sisters. And he's just asking us to do the same thing. Put him above our brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers, when the situation calls for it. And so this is a very hard saying, because relationships, I might can give up my possessions. Maybe I can do without an extra coat this winter, or maybe I can do it without that extra $5 to help somebody out. But you're asking me now to maybe step away from a relationship that I love very much, perhaps. Very challenging, very difficult. But he doesn't make it easier, as he continues in verse 27. Whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. So he's saying, unless you give your all. Matter of fact, in that last phrase, what did he say in verse 26? Even his own life. You even got to hate your own life. In other words, love your life less than you love Christ. He says, for whoever does not carry his own cross, the cross back then, today it's a glorified thing. The cross is a beautiful thing. It's in cathedrals. But back then the cross was kind of like talking about the electric chair, or lethal injection or something like that. It was a symbol of death, of torture, of immense pain. He says, unless you take up your cross and come after me, you cannot be my disciple. In other words, sacrifice all. Give up everything. If you're not willing to do that, you can't be my disciple. Do you really ever hear that taught a whole lot in popular society? Is that the Jesus that is presented oftentimes? The one who asks for your all, for everything? When we don't teach that, when we avoid these difficult sayings by Jesus and just kind of skip over them and just really focus on, well, Jesus loves everybody and this, that, and the other, and it doesn't really matter what you do. Whenever we skip over that, we set people up for failure. And that's what Jesus is going to talk about as he continues on. In verse 28, he says, for which one of you, when he wants to build a tower, does not first sit down and calculate the cost to see if he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who observe it begin to ridicule him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king, when he sets out to meet another king in battle, will not first sit down and consider whether he is strong enough with 10,000 men to encounter the one coming against him with 20,000? Or else while the other is still far away, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. So then none of you can be my disciple who does not give up all his own possessions. So here he's saying that it's kind of like a person who goes out and wants to build a house or build some type of building or structure, or tower is specifically mentioned, and he's not really prepared. He doesn't really calculate the cost. Maybe he's like me when I do a project. I just walk into Home Depot, just kind of try to collect what I need. The best way to do it is really to sit down and to line by line. This is what I need to purchase. This is how much it's going to cost. Do I have enough in my budget to cover the cost of this particular project? That's the right way to do it. And that relates to being a disciple of Jesus. Before you go marching into just becoming a disciple of Jesus, you got to first think, okay, what is this going to cost me? And am I willing to pay what it will cost me to become Jesus' disciple? And that's the part that's oftentimes overlooked when we're trying to bring people into a relationship with Christ. To show them, look, you'll receive forgiveness of sins, eternal life, you have the hope of the resurrection, you'll share in the new heavens and new earth that God has promised. There's beautiful things await you if you come to Christ, but guess what also? It's going to require your all. It's going to require total and absolute commitment to Christ. That's the uncomfortable part, but it's the necessary part, because oftentimes what will happen is a person will come to Christ thinking that it's going to be easy, that it's going to be, and go into it in a lackadaisical attitude, and then hardships and trials and difficulties come, maybe friction within relationships that they have, maybe hard decisions come between themselves and their career or other things, and they realize, whoa, what have I gotten myself into? And if they weren't prepared for it beforehand, they can become overwhelmed by the burden, overwhelmed by the requirement of sacrifice, and they can walk away. And so it's actually kind of selling people short when we give them an easy Jesus. It's better to present it all. And here Jesus is saying, just as a person needs to count the cost before they build the tower, so does a person need to count the cost when becoming a disciple. Also, the same thing with a king. When he's going out to battle, he's got to say, look, can my 10,000 men hold up against that guy's 20,000 men? That's when we are going into a relationship with Christ. It's not only just a cost involved, but also a battle that we're entering into. Are we willing to fight that battle? Do we recognize the fact that we are coming against principalities and powers in the heavenly places, the places of darkness, are going to come working out against us? Are we willing to go full-fledged into that battle, knowing that we're outnumbered, but we're not outnumbered? We're outnumbered maybe numerically, but we outnumber them because we have Christ. Christ plus anybody outnumbers anything. And we can come against the battle, but are we prepared? Do we know that we can? And are we willing to go into the battle with Christ at our side? So then, none of you can be my disciples who does not give up all his possessions, who's not willing to give up your all, willing to sacrifice all for the sake of the kingdom and for the sake of your relationship with him. In verse 34, therefore salt is good, but if even salt has become tasteless, with what will it be seasoned? It is useless either for the soil or for the manure pile. It is thrown out. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. In other words, once salt lost its taste, it's completely lost. And if we step out into a relationship with Christ, we go out to be a disciple, but then we realize, I don't want to do this anymore, or we lose that power, or that we lose that motivation to follow him, all the pressures come on us and we walk away. It's almost like trying to make salt salty again. It's very, very difficult, and it's hard. And so the idea is that let's make sure that we have enough within us to want to do it. Now, before we close, I want to say, because someone might say, well, I don't have enough to pay the cost. I don't have enough to go out against the 20,000. I don't have it within me to fight. Well, you know what? You're perfect for the kingdom in the sense that, one, you're considering the cost, but two, you realize you can't do it in and of yourself, and you can take confidence in knowing that God will be there with you to help you. He will give you the strength. He will give you the ability to do it, but it's going to take submission, and it's going to take resolve, but it will take also a commitment to the cause of Christ. But when we do that, he will come and help us. He will strengthen us. He will help us in the challenges, the struggles that go up ahead of us. So don't feel like, well, I can't come to Christ because I've counted the cost and I don't have what it takes. Christ will help you. God will help you with that. None of us can really stand up against the battle. But when we humbly submit to him, we say, I don't have it, but I'm willing to give up what I do have, and I'm willing to go by faith and knowing that Christ will meet me where I fall short, then I can move ahead. Then I can go into the battle. I can go into the project with confidence, knowing that I can follow it through. So this is chapter 14 for us. Discipleship. Again, not easy teachings from Jesus. Very difficult teachings. Very challenging teachings. But we got to remember what we're receiving. We're receiving a good feast. We're receiving true life, true sustenance. Life that not only satisfies in this life, but will satisfy in the life to come. A life that will produce within us eternal life, where we'll get to live with him forever. A few years of challenge, a few years of sacrifice and self-denial for millions upon billions upon trillions of years of just bliss and joy and full satisfaction, feasting with Christ, living in the presence of God, never worrying about death or sickness or COVID or anything like that, just living in the joy of the presence of the Lord. When 1,000,000 years have passed, guess what? We got 1,000,000 more to go, and when that million's passed, we got 1,000,000 more to go. Just eternal bliss forever. And this little short sliver of life that we have now is nothing compared to that. Paul said in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, he's convinced, he didn't lose heart because he knew that this momentary light affliction was producing for him an eternal weight of glory. And it was very well worth the trade. So as we consider that, as we all consider our walk with the Lord, let's be encouraged. It's difficult, it's hard sometimes, but it's worth it. And I would invite anyone who hasn't come to the feast, that the invitation is out there. The Lord wants as many people. God wants his house to be filled with people who can come and share in the blessings that he will provide. And he's inviting us all to do that. And we would encourage anyone who wants to come to the Lord, receive